I'm Maria Bruno, Executive Director of Ohioans Against Extremism. And you maybe have heard us spend a lot of time over the last few months talking about Ohio's state budget. That's because it has a huge impact on so many aspects of our life here in Ohio. Next week will be your opportunity to say how you feel about Ohio's budget. Next week, there will be four opportunities to testify about the Ohio budget: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday, May 27th through Thursday, May 30th. You can show up and testify about any aspect of the bill, and anyone can show up. But here's the catch. Instead of testimony being due 24 hours before the hearing, next week's testimony is all due, no matter which day you plan to testify on, tomorrow at 5 p.m. Friday, May 23rd at 5 p.m. You have to turn in your witness slip and your written testimony. So if you want to testify, the moment to do so is right now. You don't have to talk about everything. You don't have to pretend to be an expert about stuff you don't know. This is your opportunity as an Ohioan to say, this is what I care about, and your budget better reflect what Ohioans care about. There is a lot in the bill. There's a lot to comment on. And frankly, there's a lot of bad stuff. So, in that spirit, we want to give you a little brush up on what is in Ohio's budget this year and what maybe you can talk about if you submit testimony. Now, here's Rachel Coyle from our webinar a couple weeks ago talking about what is in Ohio's budget this year.
The operating budget bill is often thousands of pages long. And so we basically pull pieces from it that we want to advocate for and against. So everything in the next couple of slides is all part of the same bill, technically. But when you call or testify, you are testifying on just an individual piece. So it's a little bit confusing, but it is incredibly important. Every major item that could ever potentially have money connected to it is in the budget. So we are fighting for schools and libraries and healthcare and so much more. So in the budget right now, one of the number one fights going on is the fight on whether or not to fund our public schools, essentially. So Matt Huffman, who's featured there in the photo, he is the House Speaker. He has made it very clear publicly for years now that he does not believe in our public school system. He wants to move us towards privatization, towards charters and religious schools, toward micro schools and homeschooling. He just does not believe in the public school system. And he is now in a position to try to make that happen. So he is essentially using a very popular message by saying that school funding is unsustainable. We can't throw money at the problem anymore. We have to cut school funding. There's just no getting around it, which, of course, is not how the rest of us on this call would probably feel, because we have been watching for many years now the school funding fight to create a constitutional school funding system in Ohio. There was a few years back a large group of bipartisan legislators, Republicans and Democrats, and tax experts and policy experts who got together and fought for years, and debated and edited and rewrote this plan, the Fair School Funding Plan, to fund our schools constitutionally. And we are supposed to be in the middle, year 4 of 6 of implementing that plan right now. So the argument that school funding is unsustainable is really, is not necessarily the only argument to be made. In fact, I would call it untrue. So what we have been arguing against, the say that we need to cut school funding, is by talking about priorities. So one of the things the budget does is it would give $600 million, which actually would end up being more of money in the budget to fund a new stadium for the Browns, for the Cleveland Browns, while still saying that public education funding is unsustainable. So we can make the argument that students should be the priority, that spending on our schools and our kids should be the priority before we fund sports stadiums. Another argument that you can make is that Ohio right now is spending nearly $1 billion every year on vouchers to private and religious schools. So this is money, all education money comes from the same pot of money. So every dollar that goes to these vouchers for these private and religious schools is money that could be going to the public schools if, again, we prioritized the public schools where 90% of kids attend. So the argument, again, is we could be spending money on the schools that most students attend, public money for public schools, rather than these hundreds of millions of dollars for private school vouchers. There has been new data that came out recently that showed that most of the people who use the vouchers are actually not low income. So the goal of the vouchers is no longer being met. We've also seen data showing that most of the people using the voucher money were already sending their kids to private schools, and now they're just doing it for free. So it is our fight continues on messaging around the fact that it is not true that it's unsustainable to fund public schools, but that we could find the money if we wanted to. Here is one example of many of where we could find that money. Another big piece of this, again, this is all the school funding fight in the budget, is the fact that they're trying to expand the voucher, universal voucher piece even further in the budget. So they're trying to give more money to vouchers, and they're trying to add who can get this money in new ways. One of the ways they're trying to do it is Senate Bill 68, which has now been added to the budget bill, which would create what's called educational savings accounts for non-chartered, non-public schools, which are totally unregulated religious schools. Basically, these savings accounts are even more broad and even less regulated than universal vouchers. Basically, parents who participate in this program would get a spending account full of your tax dollars, and that money could be spent on anything. They could argue that taking their kids on a field trip to the Creation Museum is their education for the week. And like that is, they could do whatever they want with it. It is truly unregulated. It can be used on far more than just tuition, which is what the vouchers cover. So it would be more money that is not going to the public schools being sent to we don't know where to be used on unregulated religious schools. It really is, again, a priorities issue. So one of the many things we can do about it. We've got another bit.ly link for you all, bit.ly/Ohio Fair School Funding. Shout out to Honesty for Ohio Education for that one. They have lots of calls to action on there. And there's lots of pieces in the bit.ly link with talking points, with messaging ideas, with a template for how to submit testimony. So if that is something, if the last few slides have really fired you up, this is an action that you can take today to help fight for this public school money for public schools. And then another piece of this budget that we're dealing with, so this is again the large budget bill, a piece of the budget, also comes with its own bit.ly link, Save Ohio Libraries. We have seen just the House put in historic cuts to libraries in the state budget. They not only cut the library funding by a huge amount, they also actually removed the public library fund, which is the piece of the budget that promises libraries some percentage of funding every month, every year, so that they can budget properly, they can prepare. The libraries did an incredible job pushing back and getting public outrage, so getting people to call in. And they did have a little bit of a victory on this, which is the legislators put the words public library fund back in the budget, which is a start, but they didn't put any money connected to it. Basically, the legislators can still decide year to year, probably even month to month, what the budget for the libraries would look like. So that is not acceptable because they could fund it at zero. They could fund the libraries at $0 if they wanted. So our ask is essentially to put the library fund back at a certain percent of the state fund so that every month, every year, the libraries know what percent of money they're going to be getting so they can prepare. So we're not even asking anymore to increase the library fund. We're literally just asking them to put it back at 1.7% of the state fund, state GRF. And this and both of these actually, you will see in the links that we have shared, there's going to be lots of asks of the rural and Appalachian legislators because both school funding and the library funding, those fights are going to need to be had largely by rural Republicans and Appalachian Republicans. We need them to stand up to their leadership because their districts would be just really, really hurt by both of these programs being cut. Rural areas don't have private schools. They don't have voucher religious schools. They tend to have the local public school that everyone attends. You know, on Friday night, everybody goes to the local public high school football game. It's part of the community. So we need rural Republican legislators to have to have the courage to stand up to their leadership, and that is going to come from public pushback on them. So a lot of the Bitly links, you will see the calls to action are directed at those particular legislators. Note that there is a piece of the budget that would get rid of all the elected state board of education members. We are already in a place where the state has cut the rights and the abilities and the powers of the state board of education, and now would completely get rid of the elected board members and all of the board members. It would be a smaller board, and all members would be appointed by the governor. So just again, coalescing power around one of the branches of government, taking power away from the citizens. We are seeing this as a theme, making it harder to vote, making it harder to access citizen ballot initiatives, and making it so that there are fewer things that citizens can actually vote on. And now I'm going to turn it over to Danielle DeLeon Spires from Ohio Poverty Law Center to talk to us about a couple other pieces in the budget around Medicaid and healthcare.
So this is trigger language that could immediately impact Ohio's Medicaid expansion population. What does that mean? But so this is the low income, able bodied adults without dependents population. These are individuals who received um, Medicaid coverage under the ACA expansion. So these are individuals that the income level goes up to 138% of the federal poverty level, which we know, 138%. I've got a couple numbers here. So that's a 21,000 income for a singular person, family of three. That's 36,000. But so basically, what's been put into the budget, and these kind of went a little under the radar because they are technically included in the section of the budget under the Office of Budget and Management. The federal level, there's something called FMAP. It's the federal Medicaid assistance percentage, which is how much of the Medicaid costs are covered by the federal government, with the state covering the remainder. There's a different FMAP for kind of the general population. So on the federal level, Congress has been told cut just astronomical amounts out of the HHS budgets, out of Medicaid, and there's just really no way to do it. The numbers don't really add up. So basically, Ohio is trying to get in front of that, is what we've heard, and say if the federal government says we are going to lower that FMAP from 90%, that will immediately allow the state to end Medicaid expansion. So we've got some numbers there as of right now, and this is, if this was implemented with everybody receiving proper notice and making sure that no one was getting wrapped up in this would still be almost 800,000 Ohioans who would be losing healthcare coverage. This is a population of Ohio that, we are hearing if would immediately end healthcare coverage. And so it says immediately discontinue. What we've been advocating for is for these provisions to be removed, entirely, or change it in a way to kind of stay in the conversation. Could you change it to permissive? And so what Medicaid has said is, any changes made to the program would need to be a combination of state action, federal action. Everybody would be, in the conversation, but we are still looking at a large cut to healthcare. And so we are just asking for people to remove that. And then there is a second provision that is a little bit different, but still equally dangerous. And this one has gone a little bit more under the radar because it's confusing as all get out, probably intentionally. So we're kind of referring to it as the federal mirror language, and it allows Ohio um, to take whatever action you see on the federal government for a program and do the same thing in the state. So if the federal government cuts, pauses, suspends, reduces anything on their level, if Ohio has a state program that's the same program that uses federal funding, they can do that exact same thing. Like I said, what does that mean? Nobody really knows, but some of the conversation has been about the Children's Health Insurance Program. Kind of seems to be the unspoken thing. So, there's the state Children's Health Insurance Program that's matching funds to states for health insurance for families with children. This is families who have incomes that, that are too high to qualify for Medicaid. And again, we see what the income levels for Medicaid are. So, still not earning a living wage, but health insurance would otherwise be out of their reach. Again, like I said, it's not explicitly laid out that that's the program, but that's just one of the many examples of why we're advocating for this language to be taken out, because the impact is immediate, it's far reaching, and it just, is dangerous.
All right. So this one is from our friends at Ohio. So the Ohio Housing Trust Fund is at risk. So this is the main form of funding that is used for local homelessness and affordable housing projects. And this would, at the moment, in the current budget, it would be removed. So there would be obviously significantly less funds and fewer funds that are promised year to year to programs that help prevent and address homelessness and lack of housing. So this is a call to action from our friends at Ohio, and that is also in our budget tracker, which we will share with you as well. And then I'm going to throw it over to Maria real fast, who's going to talk through this piece of the budget that you will likely hear about from a coalition of folks here very shortly if it stays in the budget.
But the long story short of it is, when you are trying to find misbehavior by public officials, one of the best ways to go about doing that is to be able to follow an investigation from start to finish and be able to have the public have access to those records. Similarly, if there is even a private citizen that has, let's say, a pattern of behavior, sometimes incident reports and personal notes and other things that can provide a pattern, are only available through public records. So a lot of the times when we're talking about citizen journalists, when we're talking about civil litigation against police officers, when we're talking about general sunshine law access, we need the public to have access to these public records. They have slipped a provision into the budget, which heavily, heavily, heavily limits the ability to get these records at all. The Ohio Innocence Project and many other victim advocates and wrongful conviction advocates and all of the folks that follow along very closely with that criminal justice system are very, very concerned about this, because the first thing to do if you want to hide misbehavior is limit access to the ability to find that information at all. And these provisions really do take a hatchet to some of the most reliable resources in finding some of that information, whether it's police misbehavior or just other patterns of behaviors, or even alternative theories of the case, right? Like if there is someone who's having the law thrown at them, if there is a problem with the incident or arrest process, those are a lot harder to find if you can't access those records. So it really is a slippery slope to a more fascist government if we were to have this kind of limits on public access of records.
We have this ongoing bill tracker, ohiobills.wtf. I had to spend a couple extra dollars to make it WTF, and it was worth it because I giggle every time. So this tracker is updated regularly, and we very much love pulling resources from our amazing partners. So if our partners have a toolkit or a call to action link that they are sharing, we will add it into this website as well.
No matter what day you plan to testify next week, your testimony is due this Friday at 5 p.m. So make sure to get your testimony in no later than then. So you have to submit it soon. In your own testimony, you don't have to talk about everything. And in fact, it's better if you just focus on a couple different things. So don't get overwhelmed. Pick one or two things that you care a lot about and focus your testimony on those things. Next week will be your opportunity to testify on how you feel about Ohio's budget. Show the legislators that you're paying attention.